This
Your audio went out again.
motherfucker. Turn the volume down.
Well,
Okay.
let me say this about that. It was 3 episodes in a row. It didn't happen last time, but now here it is again. So you get to do the stab all over again.
Nice. I think we should leave all of this in.
Oh, I'm going to. I'm absolutely going to.
This is your father's D&D.
Welcome to episode 247 of Nerdery Murdery.
Big 247. I'm Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Jeff here with your Murdery. Welcome to another week of the highs and lows, of the up and down, the good and the bad, and the nerd, the murd. All right, I'm excited to hear about this. I'm going to let you take away on the nerdery side of the house.
Today we're going to talk about Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd Edition.
Cool.
Yeah, we're going to get a little nerdy on this one. So for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd Edition, all you actually need is the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. They were trying to clean a lot of that stuff up. Is that all they produced? Hell no, they produced a bunch of shit. But I'm going to explain why as we go along. Give you a little bit of background first. In 1987, a small team of designers at TSR led by Dave Zeb Cook began work on the 2nd edition of the AD&D game, which would be completed almost 2 years later. In 1989, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition was published, featuring new rules and character classes. By the end of its first decade, AD&D had expanded to several rule books, including 3 collections of monsters, Monster Manual 2, and Feed Folio, and 2 books governing character skills in wilderness and underground settings. Gygax had already planned a 2nd edition for the game, which would have also have been an update of the rules, incorporating the material from Unearthed Arcana, Oriental Adventures, and numerous new innovations from Dragon Magazine and the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide would have consolidated the Monster Manual 2, and Fiend Folio into one volume. Initially, the 2nd edition was planned to consolidate the game, but more changes were made during development while still aiming at backward compatibility with 1st edition. The release of AD&D 2nd edition corresponded with important policy changes at TSR. An effort was made to remove aspects of the game which were attracting negative publicity, most notably the removal of all mentions of demons and devils, although these fiendish monsters were renamed Tanari and Beatazu, respectively, moving away from the moral ambiguity of the 1st edition AD&D. The TSR staff eliminated character classes and races like the Assassin and the Half-Orc and stressed heroic role-playing and player teamwork. The target age of the game was also lowered, with most 2nd edition products being aimed primarily at teenagers. The game was again published as 3 core rule books, which incorporated the expansion and revisions which had been published in various supplements over the previous decade. However, the Monster Manual was replaced by the Monstrous Compendium, a loose leaf binder in which every monster is given a full page of information. It was the intention of the pack of new monsters, often setting specifics, could be purchased and added to the binder without the expense or inconvenience of a separate book, allowing the book to be updated and customized as needed. This format proved highly susceptible to wear and tear, however, and presented difficulties in keeping alphabetical order when pages had been printed with monsters on each side. Subsequently, the loose leaf formatting was abandoned, and the compendium as a core book was replaced by single-volume hardcore monstrous manuals in 1993. Collecting popular monsters from the compendium, the edition also greatly increased the power of dragons in order to counter the oppression of relatively weakness of the game's titular monsters. So, that is a lot of information. Let me start by saying you didn't actually need the Monster Manual. There was enough in the Dungeon Master's Guide. You only needed the 2. But if you got the 3, you could pretty much play. What they did was, for certain races or different types of things or different character classes, they produced a small little $15 book that you could go and pick up. So if you wanted, you were really into elves, you could pick the complete book of elves. And again, we'll talk about those a little later because they made a bunch of them. But essentially, you could play this with 2 books and be perfectly happy making campaigns and playing. You could play with minis, you could play with dry erase boards, all of it. It took all of that into account. And it honestly, it did not sell really well the first year it was out. But by the mid 90s, this is what everyone was playing. When people talk about playing D&D, they're either talking about it in the 80s, which was first edition, AD&D first edition, or more likely than not, what they're fondly remembering was playing this particular version of the game, which was AD&D second edition. Eventually, they dropped the AD&D, and with like third edition, 3.5, and subsequent editions, it's just Dungeons and Dragons. So originally, they released Dungeons and Dragons. It was just one game, but they also wanted to up the ante for people who played it a little bit. They had advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So for a long time, they had 2 lines running at the same time. In the late 80s, they decided to update the advanced Dungeons and Dragons because there was a whole bunch of stuff that had come in and different rules you can use, not use, updates to rules. They made all of that stuff more clearly defined. It was still different from Dungeons and Dragons, but essentially they quit making Dungeons and Dragons and everything was AD&D second edition by 1995, 1996. Jeffrey's nodding his head. He's like, oh, yeah. So what was different? Well, numerous mechanical changes were made to the game. The combat system was modified. The minimum number required to hit a target uses a mathematical formula in which the defender's armor class, or AC, is subtracted from the attacker's THAC0. THAC0 is 2 hit armor class 0. So you've got a weapon, you need 5 to hit armor class 0, right? Well, if this dude's got an armor class of 6, that means you need an 11. It was a really easy way to figure this out. Before that, you had to run it all through a formula. THAC0 revolutionized the game, in my humble opinion. A simplification of first edition's attack matrix tables that had appeared as an optional rule for first edition's Dungeon Master's Guide. Distances are based on in-game units, feet, rather than miniatures board ones, or inches. Critical hits are offered as optional rules. Character creation is modified in many ways. Demi-human races are given higher level maximums to increase their long-term playability. Though they are still restricted in terms of character class flexibility, character classes are organized into 4 groups. Warrior, which is a fighter, paladin, or ranger. Wizard, which is a mage or specialist wizard. Priest, which is a cleric or a druid. And rogue, which is a thief or a bard. Assassins and monks were removed from the game as character classes. Magic users are renamed mages. Illusionists are made into a subtype of the wizard class, along with new classes specializing in other schools of magic. Proficiencies are often supported in the player's handbook and many supplements rather than being an optional add-on. Psionics are no longer included in the player's handbook, though they later appeared in their own supplement. Sales of second edition core hard books were somewhat weaker than first edition combined, and the player's handbook and Dungeon Master Guide sold over 400,000 copies in the first year of release. So they didn't sell as well. Again, as I said, they didn't sell as well the first year as they were planning. But once people started picking it up, first edition kind of went by the wayside. It was considered a hit, but their lifetime sales were not close to matching the huge success of first edition. The reasons why are contested. Michael Whitwer, a biographer of Gary Gygax, cited the lack of involvement by Gygax and the changes that attempted to avoid controversy. So Gary Gygax was working, he was still working for TSR, but he was like in the film division where they were doing the cartoon and stuff like that. He was trying to get movies made, and but he wasn't actually in the office helping to design the games anymore. Ben Riggs writes that TSR insiders worry that the word advanced in the title was scaring off interested newcomers into thinking the product was not for them, and more generally than players of first edition could simply continue using their old books. Both Whitwer and Riggs cite increasing competition from other role-playing games. First edition was a trailblazer that had carved out an entirely new space, but many more tabletop role-playing games existed by 1989. And when he says many more, so in 1981, there were probably 20, roughly. By 1989, there were more like 200. In 1995, TSR re-released the core rulebook for second edition with new cover art and page layouts. It was called Revised, but they made no real rule changes. They did clarify a few things, but for the most part, it was an update with new artwork. Now, as I said, you could play this with just the 2 books. Eventually, someone could pick up the Monstrous Compendium, so you got more monsters you could use, which was nice. But if you really, really wanted to get in deep to a specific character class, you had player optional series. And again, these are those $15, well, okay, in the 90s, they were $15, 12 to 15 bucks. They were soft cover, but they were a really nice soft cover that they released, so they lasted for a long time. But it was a series of volumes labeled Players Options, allowing for alternate rule systems and character options, as well as Dungeon Master options for high-level campaigns, were released shortly after the 1995 re-release of the core rule book for second edition. The books consisted of Players Option, Combats and Tactics, Players Option, Skills and Powers, Players Option, Spells and Magic, and the Dungeon Master's Option, High-Level Campaigns. Some of the optional rules included the introduction of a point-based system, allowing players to select from a list of abilities with character classes and create more individualized characters, and a more tactical combat system that included elements such as attacks of opportunity. And then the Monstrous Compendium superseded the Monster Manual with the release of AD&D Second Edition. The Compendium was a binder, as we said. They eventually moved that over to a hardcover, which was a pretty thick tome. Think dictionary size, but it still had a lot of color and beautiful pages. The format was intended to help dungeon masters keep handy only the monster statistic needed for a particular game session, as well as to greatly expand the information about each monster, and each was given at least 1 full page. It would also mean they would only need to purchase core volumes and appendix volumes later on, but again, they condensed that into 1 book. In 1993, that monster manual was released. The first 2 volumes of the Monstrous Compendium, plus many monsters from other sources, into the 384-page hardcover book edited by Doug Stewart. More Monstrous Compendium appendices were released as supplements to the Monstrous Manual, but again, they were the little books that you could keep. You didn't need them to play, but they did help you over time. And what was great about this is you could start with the first 2 books and play for years, and as you needed stuff, buy it and go get it, which is what I like best about this series. That you didn't need all of this other errata, but it was nice to have, and you didn't all have to have it at once. You could buy a piece at a time of what you were concentrated on. And eventually you built up your library. But you had these supplement books. I'm going to basically read a list now. So you had the Complete Fighter's Handbook, the Complete Thief's Handbook, the Complete Priest's Handbook, the Complete Wizard's Handbook, the Complete Psionics Handbook, the Complete Book of Dwarves, the Complete Bard's Handbook, the Complete Book of Elves, the Complete Book of Gnomes and Halflings, the Complete Book of Humanoids, which covered gnolls and things like that, the Complete Ranger's Handbook, the Complete Paladin's Handbook, the Complete Druid's Handbook, the Complete Barbarian Handbook, the Complete Ninja Handbook, the Complete Book of Villains, which a lot of people ended up having, the Complete Book of Necromancers, the Complete Spacefarer's Handbook, the Complete Gladiator's Handbook, the Complete Shire Handbook. You had the Draconomicon, which was a complete book of dragons. You also had Of Ships and the Sea, Creative Campaigning, Monster Mythology, Arms and Equipment Guide, The Castle Guide, Sages and Specialists, Campaign Source Books, and Catacomb Guide. And I believe that is it. I may have missed a few. Um, but essentially, you had the Player's Handbook, the Dungeons Master Guide. That's all you needed. Again, they were updated about 1993 with new art, but essentially it was the same book. You could pick up the Monstrous Manual in 1993 or the Monstrous Compendium series from 89 to 98 because they both were going at the same time. And so say you're playing a ranger, you could go out and pick out, as a player, go out and pick up that ranger's handbook. It also had a lot of really great artwork in it. A lot of people collected them simply because they were beautiful tomes, because they appear to be like a leather bound, but even though they're paperbacks, it's a thick cover, and it appears to be leather. It's not, but it does look like an old leather book, and it's set beautifully on your shelves. They were color coded, so some of the animals books were green. The Of Ships and Seas books like that, where they talk about different types of things. Those were blue, and the complete elves and thieves and fighters handbooks were like a maroon color. So they actually were quite lovely after they produced them. And a lot of great artwork inside of them, but they look like old leather-bound books sitting on your shelf. Just beautiful stuff. They did a lot of artwork. They increased the artwork because the problem with the original Dungeons and Dragons, and if you've ever seen one of the old sets, the art was done by the people doing the game, and it was okay, but it was basic artwork. It was, like a 15-year-old would draw a dragon, and it was really quick, and it was all in black and white. They really put the art into the forefront. Even some of the black and white pictures that were in the book were way better than the original releases. So from a purely aesthetic point of view, this was the stuff to have. Toward the end of the AD&D second edition run, before they came out with, third edition, which scrapped AD&D and D&D and just made it one section. AD&D second edition basically took over. They stopped really producing any regular D&D stuff because the thought was, well, they have all the books already that they need. Eventually, they're going to want to get more in depth into this game, so they're going to pick up Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition, while they were doing it, it was awesome. But in hindsight, it was all over the place. And what was great about this is it was contained in, again, a couple of books, maybe 3, and you could play with that for years. You didn't need anything else. But as you figured stuff out, you'd pick up one of these little books, sometimes just to buy it because it was cool and not that expensive, and you'd be reading through it. It's like, oh, I could do this campaign, and that would become one of your source books. Whereas, like, say, I know it's a game we played a lot, say Shadowrun. Shadowrun has a source book, core rule book. You could play with that. It's fine. It's got everything you need, but you're going to want more. You're going to want Shadow Tech and the Runner's Compendium, and you're going to want the Book of Magic, and you're going to want this and this and this. And what was the one? What was the one? For the Mercenaries Companion.
You had Fields of Fire.
Shadow Tech.
But Shadow Tech leaned heavily into the rigor stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember specifically for Mercs. I remember Fields of Fire. That was one of my favorites. Cannon Companion. Well, Cannon Companion was a later version of Fields of Fire.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about AD&D, all those other books you could get, the fighter's handbook, the wizard's handbook, rogue, blah 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 blah. You could play, let's say, a paladin, for example,
Mhm.
from the basic player's manual. You could absolutely play a paladin from that. It's in there, it tells you how to play it.
Mhm.
What these further guides did is they expanded the classes further. Some of them provided extra abilities or uh, different things that the class had. It sometimes gave additional subclasses from that class that could be
Like
played in
blade
there.
singers, combo
Yeah,
classes like blade singers,
yeah.
which
And
was a
so
ranger and a fighter.
right. And so these class guides were just a way if you really wanted to dive deeper
Mhm.
into the AD&D world. You didn't want to stay with just, your standard paladin, you're a good guy, you're a stand-up dude, you wear really shiny armor and you go out and you hurt things that are evil and you
Mhm.
stand up for justice. But the paladin guide would dive deeper into the lore and would dive deeper into what that class could be, could mean, that you could do with it, and all those guides were that way. Um, they just really expanded. If you wanted to get really hyper super detailed into the world, that's when you branched out beyond the player's guide and the dungeon master guide. Shadowrun, as Zig said, was very similar. You had the basic rule book, the core rule book that would get you just perfect to start a campaign,
Mhm.
to start running. The other books allowed you to dive deeper into the worlds, and that's exactly what it did here with AD&D. And I would probably try to want to say that AD&D really kind of started that whole
Yeah.
deep dive progression in the
Yeah.
various RPGs.
Yeah. It was
Um,
perfectly, you were perfectly happy. You could perfectly play great with the player's handbook and the dungeon master's guide.
yeah,
You didn't need
GURP,
anything else.
GURPS was that way. If you grabbed the GURPS
Yeah.
core manual, you could play GURP. But if you
Yep.
wanted to dive deeper into it, you would get other things like, uh, you know, tech and whatever the whole GURPS
Yeah.
things are out there. And that's what a lot of these game systems do. You can play the game with the base set, um, perfectly well, perfectly happy, and go from there. From from a game master standpoint, really the limits of the game are your imagination. We've talked about this many times over the years. What the GM sees and what the path is they want the characters to take is all only limited by what the GM can imagine. And so while these books can provide that added depth, you don't have to have them. You want a GM who can just think outside the box and take the characters to something new, add something new into there because you can always do house rules and whatnot. So I think that was the long way of me saying that those extras are really cool, but don't let
Hmm.
that stop you from playing.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Don't
don't
think you have to
necessarily
buy
need
a
them.
hundred books.
No, you don't. And you don't. You need two.
In AD&D, yes. In some game
Mhm.
systems, you need one.
Yeah. In some game systems, you need one, but in AD&D, you needed two.
Yep.
But what was great about it is if you needed a little more, you could go out and do it without breaking the bank. That's what
Hmm.
I liked best
Hmm.
about this system. Like I didn't have to spend in the 90s $400 worth of books in errata that I'm only going to need $100 spent on. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? It's like I had to
Hmm.
buy it all. I didn't. I could buy this. I could buy this $10 at a time or $15 at a time if I needed it. And I, I I'm never going to play a psionists. I don't need it. If I'm running a game with a psionics in it, I might pick it up. Other than the fact that it looks really cool on the shelf, color coded. Oh, the Draconomicon was black. That was the only one that was off kilter. Um, yeah, this is the one that when your dad talks about playing D&D back when he was young, this is what he's talking about. This is what everybody basically moved over to because it just the books were cooler and it just made more sense. It was easier to play, because D&D first edition and then AD&D first edition were, I don't want to say all over the place, because they started from a good solid foundation, but they didn't really have a plan. They were just doing it to do it. And when they came up in 1987 and sat down, and Dane Zeb Cook went, you know what? We need a plan. Because again, you could look at the other ones who, like we said, you need one book, and if you wanted more, you could get more, but you didn't have to. That's what they did. That's what they were doing, and it was like, okay, we can't do just one book. Because of the way D&Ds are arranged, you do need a player's handbook, you do need a dungeon master's guide, but you don't really need any of the rest of it. And if you wanted to go out and grab it, you just could. You just picked it up. And
One little point though, before you carry on, I had a couple of things. You say this is what your dad played. That's not 100% true. I also don't think it's 100% true that the pre AD&D was complicated, because as I said many moons ago, I started off with the basic the basic D&D set, which was in the red box that had a solo campaign in it that you didn't even need a DM for. It was die rolls, and it was a choose your own adventure. It was fairly simple, but that was my stepping stone.
When it started out, what I'm saying is by 1986, 1987, when they sat down to do this, it wasn't like that. Yeah, gotcha. It was all over the place. It's like, okay, gotcha. I want to get this. I want to get this. He wants to play this kind of character, so I got to go out and grab this book. And what's great about this is you got a group of 6 people, you pitch in and buy one book, or or 2 books in this case, and you're done. One person can grab it and the other person can grab it, and everybody buys them food the next time, and everybody's happy. D&D, again, they started out with a great idea, and then they were like, well, you know what, we should do advanced with a more advanced rule set. But they just kept building on, and in some cases, like Dragon Magazine would throw something out there that could be used in both. And D&D and AD&D in the first edition had different rule sets. It was really hard to convert them back and forth. I mean, you could, but I'm thinking the the alignment was different. Whereas from 1989 onward, alignment was the same in both games. Because you had, instead of 3 sets of following the rules and 3 sets of moral code, D&D only had 4. Like all together. Or no, it was 6 as opposed to 9. So AD&D had that, but so it was hard to take a character and move him from one to the other, because they didn't actually have that. After 1989, everybody used that same alignment chart. The lawful, neutral, evil, chaotic, and then it was good, neutral, evil, and then you were one of those 9 boxes.
And it's funny too, and we may have said this before as well. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. We may have said it before. Being a chaotic, evil character in AD&D does not mean you're a villain.
No,
it does not mean you're a bad guy necessarily. It means you are 100% for yourself, and you do what feels good to you, and you have no regard for how it impacts anybody else. And that's where a lot of people got really vapor locked. Was I can't be a chaotic evil character because that's just a bad guy. That's the
fuck
devil.
You can't.
Yeah, no, it's not. No, it's not.
That's fun. you could be a true neutral character. Those were fun. Um,
Yeah, and being a lawful good character is hard.
yeah,
Is hard.
yeah. That's why I don't know anybody who ever played a paladin.
I did. I did. I
You
played a paladin.
you played a
Yeah,
paladin?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's hard because it's hard to be a lawful good character, which a paladin must be in order to maintain their abilities and spells and things like that. Um, in a party with anybody who's a thief, a rogue, an assassin, um, or just will toe the line of law. It's hard because you just will not abide by it.
Hmm.
And it's very difficult to play. A chaotic evil character is actually a lot easier. You just
Oh
do
yeah.
whatever the fuck you want.
Just do whatever the fuck you want. It's like check your alignment. I don't have to.
Yeah, I don't need to. I can do whatever the fuck I want.
Do the fuck I want.
If I want to help someone, I will. If it makes me
Yeah.
feel good, but I don't
Yeah.
have
Why are
to.
you? Yeah. Why are you helping them? Because it makes me feel good.
Yeah.
I don't have to check shit.
Yeah, so that was just some of the things, and like I said, the paladin is very very hard to play because of the lawful good. Because if you step out of line, you have a great chance of losing your paladin abilities.
Uh-huh. And they're substantial. You don't want to lose those paladins. The same with like clerics and druids. Hey, this is my thing. This is the rules I have to abide by. If you step outside of that, you can lose your powers. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh shit.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes your GM. Okay, we say GM. A GM is a game master. Dungeons and Dragons uses the word DM, which is a dungeon master. The thing is, all dungeon masters are game masters.
Mm-hmm.
So we say GM because it's all encompassing.
Yeah.
But yeah, your GM will throw stuff at you to try to trip you up because it makes the game more fun.
Sure.
For everybody involved.
Sure. A good GM or a good DM is not truly out to kill the characters.
No.
They will make moves towards it and see if you walk into it just because it's fun.
Uh-huh.
But
if there was no danger involved, it wouldn't be enjoyable.
Right. Any good GM or DM, their overall goal is to progress a story, regardless of what that does. Now, a good DM or a good GM worth their salt, when you happen to notice a character stepping over the line of what type of character they should be, a good DM or GM will lay out some traps to get you to completely cross that line and see what happens. Just to see what happens.
Just to see what happens. Makes it fun for everybody. Everybody around the table. God damn it. So in the YouTube playlist for this one, I put up the 10 differences. There's a video on the 10 differences between AD&D First Edition and Second Edition, how they made the shift, rules breakdowns, and there's some really long overviews of those complete books, just because I wanted to kind of show what they looked like. So you can kind of get some information if you want a slightly deeper dive. But mainly what they did was they cleaned up combat rules. They cleaned up how to create characters, so it made it a faster process. Because that was one of the complaints about AD&D First Edition in like 1985, 1986. It took forever to generate a character. It shouldn't. It shouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, you basically spend one gaming session together. Everybody creates characters. You figure out what you're going to do. And the next gaming session, you're ready to go.
That's exactly what I was going to say. And most game systems had an early edition that was that way, that the first gaming session, you never got into the actual game because you had to spend it building your characters. You had to spend it creating, building, and getting your characters ready to go. And sometimes that was a lot of fun. Sometimes that could get really tedious, especially, let me throw this out for example. if you're playing AD&D and you just have the player's rulebook and the DM's rulebook, and you want to be a fighter, your character is going to be done pretty quick.
Yeah.
You want to be a mage, it's going to take a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where it could get really boring, because you'll have some people who they're ready to go, they're ready to play, but they got to sit there for an entire gaming session because
Yeah.
of the complexity of others.
Yeah.
Most game systems fixed that in later editions, where it made it more streamlined, it made it easier, so that you could actually create a character within an hour
Yeah.
or
And then
so,
you'd be playing that
and
first
then be
night.
playing. Right.
It may not
Right.
be a big adventure, but you're going to play a little something.
Yeah.
And that's what this did for Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
It helped streamline it, which they continued later on. And they brought back some of the ideas from first edition that they felt like, well, maybe we shouldn't have just killed that idea. We should have just refined it. And so now the stuff that they're playing, it's a lot easier to generate. It's a lot more forgiving for character class and alignment. The kids are running wild with it. It's kind of cool. I listen to it a lot because K3 likes to play basically every week with their friends, and they've got 3 or 4 different campaigns running by different GMs, and they just keep it on their phone, which to me would give me anxiety. I need papers. I need a little plastic sheet that I can mark up with a grease pencil or a dry erase marker. But that's because I enjoyed playing their fathers Dungeons and Dragons. But yeah, and what's great about this stuff is you can readily go out and find it, because they sold so many copies. This is what everybody was playing for the better part of a decade. So I would recommend anybody going out and picking up, bits and bobs as you can. You can pick up the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide pretty readily. And most of the other errata that we talked about is also out there because we all bought a lot of it. In some cases, just because it looked cool, which in my mind is a really great selling point for a game. It looked cool. That's about it for AD&D Second Edition. Other than go and check it out.
Well, and a couple of things. Miranda's been playing D&D since high school now. I know when she was here for Christmas, I think she had said her gaming group was kind of on pause for a while because they were all doing various things, but she got into that where they were playing every week. And they do theirs in person. The thing I wanted to say was, so for those of you who have read Prime Numbers, you know that my book is not just about the characters and the world they're in. The overarching theme is the bonds of friendship that can't be broken, hence the name Prime Numbers. It's a number that can't be broken by anything other than itself. But it's about people whose bonds were formed at a game table. I guess I'm an old codger here. I don't see how those kind of bonds can be formed online. We had those bonds being in person, seeing the nuances people did, having the conversations that would happen naturally because of things that happened around the game table. Maybe it happens with online. I don't know. I can't answer that question. I don't personally see how it can be done. I would recommend people play in person. I would recommend people get together, roll dice on a table. Doing it online, it can have its fun. And our gaming group, we did it online during COVID because that was what we had. But we already had the bonds that we had established.
Yeah, the ones that K3 did, they started in high school, playing together.
And I think that's important. I really think that's important to be together at least for a while and let those bonds develop. But that's the big thing with all these RPGs we talk about, that I think have in common. If you can get a good group of people together that can bond over a game, um, I personally think these are the kind of bonds that will never break. It happened with our group, and I think it would happen with others. And that's why I really love talking about these, because if nothing else, as we have said many times on the show, just get out there and play some of these. You would be surprised. Some of you that like, oh, I'm not going to play some geeky D&D Shadowrun, blah 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 blah. You would be surprised, because one of the things that I remember fondly is when we were playing our various RPGs that we were back in the 90s. For the vast majority of us, we were poor. We
Mhm.
lived paycheck to paycheck. Sometimes we were wondering if we were going to make rent or bills the next month. But on that Sunday night at Keith's house, we got to step away from that for a few hours. We didn't have to think about that for a few hours. We were able to step into somebody's world, be somebody else, and not worry about the things that we had to deal with in real life. Is that escapism? Yes. To a point, it
Yeah,
is
but it's for a
escapism.
couple of hours a week,
Yeah,
and
but for a couple of hours a week. And I think that's healthy to be able to step away from your worries. It doesn't have to be that you're worried about your bills or you're worried about the next paycheck. You could have other worries in life, besides that. You could be rich and have stress and worry and doubt in your life. But RPGs allow you to step outside of yourself for a few hours. And I think that's important. I think it's good. So there's my 2 cents.
well, that about sums it up for AD&D. I agree wholeheartedly. Get out there, play with your feet, play with your people, man.
Play with
It's
your
fun.
feet. I think you were about
Play
to
with
say
your
play
feet.
with your feet.
Play with your feet. Feet. I was going to say feeple, but
People? People?
feeple. Yeah, play with your
I
people.
think if you can roll dice with your feet, I'm impressed. You can color me impressed if you can roll dice with your feet.
Oh, are you impressed? If I can
Yeah.
roll dice on my feet, I don't know if you know what? I
Yeah.
maybe give it
I
a
don't think I
shot
could.
later
I
on.
don't think I could. I can pick up a die with my foot, but roll it, I don't think so. I don't think so. So anyway, thanks for another trip down RPG lane. I love
Yes.
these. There's so
Yeah.
many out there. I mean, that we can talk about. I mean, we did talk Savage Worlds. I don't think we ever talked Fate.
We talked Fate.
Did we? Did we talk
Yeah, we
about Fate?
talked about Fate. We did Fate.
Um,
We did Palladium.
we've done
I think we
Savage
did
Worlds.
GURP specifically.
Yes, I know we did GURPS.
We did Shadowrun. We've done a bunch of D&D ones because
Oh
there's a
yeah.
bunch out there.
Oh yeah. Did we do?
Torg? We did Torg, which
We
was
did do
kind of
Torg.
underground.
Did we do Paranoia?
I don't know if we've done Paranoia.
I
I'll have to go
we
back
did
and
Paranoia
look.
or not. That's a good one. Um,
I think we talked about Paranoia because we talked about the company that made it.
yeah, we have mentioned Paranoia at least. I don't know that we covered it. But anyway, like I said, there's so many others out there. But yeah, no, I appreciate you keeping
Sure.
keeping going with our history in RPGs.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's because again, you can go out to the used bookstore and see what I'm talking about.
Yep.
That's what's great about all this.
Yep. All right. With that, I will step over to the murder side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off Wikipedia, the FBI website, the Idaho Statesman, the Spokesman Review, AP News, the Minnesota Star Tribune, and the Bismarck Tribune. And this is the story of Joseph Edward Duncan III.
Joseph Edward Duncan III.
Isn't it funny how we have so many serial killers with three names?
That's how you identify a serial killer.
They're always by
You
three
never
names.
call them like they don't call him Joe Duncan. They call him by their full name.
Yeah.
It's so the Joe Duncan in your town doesn't go, dude, that's not me.
Right. But yeah, and this one is the third.
The third. The third.
You know, I mean, some killers they leave behind crime scene.
Hmm.
Some of them just leave questions behind. They leave questions behind about how many chances someone was given, how many warnings were documented, how many times the system saw danger but chose to delay. We've talked about that before. And this one is not about a man who slipped through the crack once. It's not a story about someone who moved through every crack available. And this is a story where violence didn't arrive suddenly. It escalated. It was predicted. It was written down, and still it wasn't stopped. So today we're continuing our A to Z walk across America's serial killers. Today the letter brings us to Colorado. At least that's where we start on this path and where the failure of oversight begins. Again, this is the story of Joseph Edward Duncan, and this is the case where the question isn't what happened, it's why it was allowed to keep happening. Before Joseph Duncan became a name associated with abduction, murder, and national outrage, he was already known. He wasn't whispered about, not suspected. He was known. This is really one of the most important facts about this case. Duncan did not emerge suddenly as a violent offender. He was not an unknown predator who was discovered too late. He was a documented threat that was repeatedly identified, repeatedly evaluated, and repeatedly released. Colorado was one of the places where the system had the clearest opportunity to intervene. His history of sexual violence began early. As a teenager, he exhibited disturbing behaviors that drew attention from authorities. By adulthood, those behaviors had escalated into criminal acts involving minors. He was arrested, charged, and convicted multiple times across different states. And at no point in his path was his trajectory unclear. Psychological evaluations described him as dangerous. Court records reflected repeat offenses. Supervision reports raised concerns, and still he got to move freely. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Duncan had accumulated a criminal history that should have marked him as high risk. He had served prison time for sex crimes involving children. He had violated parole conditions, and he had demonstrated an inability or unwillingness to comply with supervision. And yet, again and again, he was released. So Colorado really enters this story not as a surprise location, but part of a larger pattern. Duncan did not settle in one place. He drifted and he relocated. He sought anonymity where he could find it, and each move reset the clock for him. And this is really where one of the most dangerous blind spots are, is when offenders cross jurisdiction and responsibility fractures. Files don't always follow, and risk assessments lose context. Each agency sees a piece of the story, not the whole thing. When he was in Colorado, Duncan lived under supervision. He was known to authorities, and he was required to comply with conditions that were meant to prevent reoffending. But supervision is only as strong as enforcement. At various points, Duncan failed to register properly, and he violated parole terms. He demonstrated behaviors that should have triggered immediate intervention, but instead the responses were delayed, minimized, or fragmented. And this is not the story about one bad decision. It's a story about accumulation. Each time Duncan was released, the system told itself a version of the same lie. This time might be different. Monitoring was enough. The risk was manageable. But these warning signs never disappeared. They stacked. Agencies debated jurisdiction, compliance, and procedure. And so Duncan continued doing what he had always done, seeking access, seeking control, and seeking victims. And it's really important to say this clearly. Joseph Edward Duncan III did not, quote, fall through the cracks. He walked across a system that kept opening doors for him. By the time his crimes reached national attention, the narrative focused on shock and on disbelief, and on how something so horrific could happen. But for anyone who read his file, there was no mystery. The danger was not hidden, it was documented. And Colorado ended up being one of the last places that it could have stopped before it escalated into something worse.
I guarantee either a parole officer or a policeman who busted him knew. They were like, I could see this coming. If they don't get this guy under wraps, this is coming.
No. Not many.
Lots.
Many did this. What made Duncan especially dangerous was not just what he did, it's where and how he was allowed to do it. He was not confined to a single jurisdiction. He moved across state lines repeatedly, and every move fractured accountability just enough to keep him mobile. Each relocation gave him distance from prior supervision, and each new address forced agencies to rebuild awareness instead of inheriting it. And this is where systems fail most predictably. Risk does not reset just because geography changes, but paperwork often does. Duncan's criminal history followed him only imperfectly. Parole conditions varied by state, and registration requirements were inconsistently enforced. Oversight depended not just on policy, but on bandwidth and whether someone noticed noncompliance quickly enough to matter, and too often they didn't. In Colorado, he was required to register as a sex offender, and he was required to report changes in residence. He was required to comply with supervision conditions designed to prevent exactly what would later occur, and he failed those requirements more than once. However, failure to register is often treated as administrative before it's treated as dangerous. It's logged, it's flagged, and then depending on resources and priorities, it just waits. And for someone like Duncan, waiting was all he needed. When he left Colorado, the system did not move with urgency. There was no immediate nationwide alert that followed him and no coordinated effort that treated his disappearance from supervision to an escalating threat. Instead, this is where it became a jurisdictional problem. This was a question of who was responsible now. So while a delay in responsibility shifted, this is the gap where escalation happened. His behavior did not stabilize after Colorado. It intensified. He had writings that became more explicit. His fantasies became more violent and his planning more deliberate, but still he moved freely. And this is one of the most unsettling truths in cases like this, is that escalation is rarely invisible. It's usually documented, just not centralized. Each parole violation is documented, each missing registration, each concerning report. Individually, they're handled as compliance issues, but together they tell the story of a person losing containment, but no one was tasked with reading the full story in real time. By the time Duncan's crimes reached their most extreme expression, the narrative shifted from supervision failure to shock, and from risk management to aftermath. Escalation, though, doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens when warning signs are treated as inconveniences rather than alarm. Duncan did not outsmart the system. He outlasted it, and he relied on delay, on diffusion of responsibility, and on the reality that when everyone is watching their part, no one is watching the whole. As he crossed state lines, that reality followed him very quietly, but with devastating consequences. Really, the tragedy of this phase of the story is not just what Duncan was becoming, it's how clearly the system had already seen him and how little that vision ultimately changed his trajectory. By the time his violence exploded into national attention, the opportunity for prevention had long passed, and what followed would force a reckoning, and not just with one man's crimes, but the cumulative cost of hesitation. When the crimes that made Duncan nationally known finally occurred, again, they did not arrive without warning. They arrived after years of documentation and evaluation that flagged danger, and after supervision failures that were recorded, discussed, and deprioritized. What changed here was not the offender. What changed was the scale of harm. Long before the I think it's pronounced Groene, Groene. Before the Groene family ever heard Joseph Edward Duncan III's name, others had already suffered at his hands. These were not rumors, they were not suspicions, they were documented crimes. In 1996, Duncan kidnapped and sexually assaulted a 14-year-old boy in North Dakota. It was not an ambiguous crime. He was arrested, he was convicted, and he served time. And when he was released, the system classified him exactly as it should have. High risk, violent offender, sexual predator. This should have been the end of his access to the public, but it wasn't. After his release, he continued to move across state lines. He violated supervision conditions repeatedly.
So they can't they restrict him from, if he's on parole, can't they restrict him from leaving the state?
Sure, they can. Absolutely, they can.
They just didn't,
and they usually do. But he simply violated his conditions and moved on. But the states weren't talking to each other. They weren't putting out these national alerts. They weren't putting out these be on the lookout alerts, extended range. So he continued moving across state lines. He violated supervision conditions repeatedly. And he failed to register properly as a sex offender. He drifted through Montana, Washington, Minnesota, and Idaho very often without consequence. In 2004, he abducted another child in Minnesota, and this time the victim survived. Duncan was caught. And again, the system had an opportunity to stop him permanently, but once again, this response stopped short. He was jailed briefly, he was released again, and then he disappeared back into the gaps between jurisdictions. Each crime he had increased the warning signs. Each arrest added clarity, and each release sent the same message back into the world that this man is dangerous, but not dangerous enough to contain. By the time he entered Idaho in 2005, he was not an unknown predator. He was not a mystery. He was a documented threat who had already demonstrated exactly what he was capable of doing. The tragedy that followed was not sudden. It was very cumulative. And in May of 2005, Duncan crossed from being a known risk into a national crisis. In northern Idaho, he targeted the Grown family, not impulsively, not opportunistically, but deliberately. He surveilled them, he planned, and he chose. This attack was brutal. Duncan murdered three members of the family in their home and abducted two children, taking them across state lines. This was immediate violence, overwhelming and impossible to contextualize as anything other than it was, a catastrophic failure.
Taking children across the state line should have triggered the feds, right?
Correct. That's exactly what it's supposed to do at that point, because when you cross state lines, you enter into federal territory. So at this point for law enforcement, this is the moment where every missed warning converged into a single event. For the public, it was incomprehensible. How could someone with Duncan's history still be free? How could someone with documented risk still have access? And how could so many prior failures end in something this extreme? The answers became very uncomfortable because they were systemic. Duncan was apprehended not because the system finally worked, but because the scale of the crime made invisibility impossible. Amber alerts were issued and multi-agency task forces mobilized. Media attention exploded on this, and resources now flowed in a way they had never flowed before. The same man who had quietly violated parole and registration requirements was now the focus of national urgency, and that's where that contrast mattered. Duncan ultimately was captured after a traffic stop, with one of the abducted children still alive. The other had already been murdered. When his identity was confirmed, investigators across multiple states began reviewing his file, not as a suspect, but as a post-mortem, and the same facts kept resurfacing: prior conviction, failed supervision, missed registration, escalating behavior, and geographic drift. This was not a case of hindsight bias. It was a case of foresight that got ignored. Investigators later covered extensive child exploitation material, reinforcing what the system had already known. During interrogation and later court proceedings, Duncan made no effort to present himself as misunderstood. His writing and statements revealed long-standing violent fantasies. His actions aligned with patterns that professionals had warned about for years. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. He was convicted and sentenced to death for his crimes. The legal outcome, again, reflected the severity of the harm, but no sentence could answer the deeper question that the case left behind. Not how did this happen, but why it wasn't stopped. Because when Duncan's story is told honestly, the most disturbing element in this is not the act of violence. It's how many moments existed where intervention could have changed the ending. We've talked about this before. We've had cases like this before. And this case forced agencies to confront their blind spots. It then sparked conversations about sex offender registries, interstate communication, parole enforcement, and the limits of supervision. But unfortunately, those conversations arrived after the damage had been done. Duncan did not represent a failure of prediction. He represented a failure of response. The danger was known, the risk is documented, the outcome was preventable. And that's why this case endures, not just as a record of violence, but as a warning about what happens when systems confuse monitoring with containment. Duncan was ultimately held accountable in the narrowest sense of the word. He was convicted, he was sentenced to death, and he was removed from society permanently. And on paper, the system worked eventually. But accountability in this case cannot be measured just by the courtroom outcome, because the most consequential failures happened long before he stood before a judge. After his conviction, agencies across multiple states were forced into an uncomfortable reckoning. They conducted reviews, timelines were reconstructed, Decisions were re-examined, and again, the same truth emerged. Duncan was not invisible. He was known. He had been assessed as dangerous. He had been identified as high risk. He had violated supervision requirements repeatedly, and he had crossed state lines while under monitoring. What failed was not awareness. It was coordination, enforcement, and follow-through. In the year following the Groen murders, Duncan's case became a reference point in discussions about offender management, not because it introduced new concepts, but because it exposed how existing systems fracture when responsibility is divided too thinly. Probation agencies assumed other jurisdictions were tracking him. Registration systems logged information without triggering action, and warnings existed in files but not in practice. And this is where bureaucratic diffusion gets dangerous. This is where responsibility is shared and urgency often disappears. For the families affected by Duncan's crime, the accountability arrived too late to matter in any meaningful way. Sentencing did not return children to parents, reviews did not undo trauma, and policy discussions did not replace lives that were lost. What remained instead was grief layered with anger, not only at Duncan, but the systems that allowed him to remain free long after he demonstrated who he was. This case is not just about a serial offender, it's about thresholds and about how much warning is considered enough, and how many violations are tolerated before intervention becomes mandatory rather than discretionary. Duncan crossed countless thresholds without consequence, and each time the system chose monitoring over enforcement, it sent a message not to the public but to the offender, and that message was very simple. You can keep going. When reform discussions followed, they focused on tools, better registries, improved information sharing, clearer jurisdictional authority, and which were all necessary and all overdue, but tools do not replace will. Duncan did not explore a single loophole. He exploited a culture of hesitation and a belief that containment could substitute for action. There's a tendency to treat extreme risk as theoretical until it becomes undeniable. And unfortunately, by the time denial was no longer possible, the cost had already been paid by others. So as we continue this A to Z journey across America's serial killers, Duncan's case stands apart, not because of his brutality, but because of its preventability. This was easily preventable. This was not a story that required brilliance and massive detective work to solve. It just required attention, coordination, and the courage to act before catastrophe rather than after. Duncan is gone now. He died in prison in 2021 while awaiting execution. His death closed a legal chapter, but it didn't close the questions that it remains behind. How many warnings does it take before an action becomes culpability? This is not a story about fear. It's not about monsters hiding in shadows. It's about what happens when danger is documented and ignored. And honestly, why the most important moment in cases like this is never the arrest. It's the point where someone could have said enough and didn't. And that's the case of Joseph Edward Duncan III.
Well, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that.
You bet. I appreciate you sitting there through that with me. That will take us to the end of another recording week. As always, you can find us on nerderymurdery.com, our hub, our website. You'll find more information about us as well as links to the YouTube page, which Zig so often update.
Yeah, check out that YouTube. It's for our playlist for this one. There's more of a deeper dive, and you get to see the textures and the colors of some of these books that I'm talking about. They're just beautiful. Yeah,
they're really pretty stuff. Definitely take a check and take a look on that, and thank you for all your work on that.
Thanks, sir.
You can also find the link to our merchandise page, where if you wish to show off your Nerdery Murdery fandom, please do consider something from that. The sales from the merchandise do go to the cost associated with the show. And if you get some Nerdery Murdery merchandise or are considering it, I would go ahead and do it, because you know what? You look damn good in it.
Damn good.
You can also find the link to our Patreon account, where if you wish to become a patron, that along with our merchandise go to everything for this show, that costs for our storage, for our uploads, for our website, everything that goes into this. It does not provide for our luscious Lamborghinis. It does not provide for our lavish vacations. And it does not supply the mortgage on our massive mansions. I do promise you that. Another thing you can do that is completely free to you, takes only a few minutes, is leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It helps us and helps others find our content that may be looking for the information we discuss.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. And last but certainly not least, as always, we close out our show to our good friend Chuck. You can go sleep now.
Good night, Chuck.
Good night, Chuck. With that,
I have been Zig with your Nerdery.
and I'm Jeffrey with your Murdery.
Cue the music.
Stained old map, stealing spell in a tavern back room. Dice shake hard in a calloused hand as the rumors crawl in from the gloom. Dragons grin in the treasure pile, but the blood on the gold feels wrong. There's a whisper buried in the lore, and it sounds like a victim song. This is Nerdery Murdery, where the tales grow teeth in the dark. When the character sheet meets a cold case file, and the secret rolls high on the chart. From the dungeon floor to the crime scene chart, we chase the riddle in the scream and the spore. Nerdery and murdery, let the legends pick the lock on your heart. Torchlight claws at a prison door, shadow moves where the thief once stood. Every clue like a cursed old blade, every footprint tracked through the wood. Late night laughs till the room goes still as the motive cuts into view. Was it greed? Was it rage? Was it something strange that the monster learned from you? This is Nerdery and Murdery, where the tales grow teeth in the dark. When the character sheet meets a cold case file, and the secret rolls high on the chart. From the dungeon floor to the crime scene chart, we chase the riddle in the scream and the spore. Nerdery and murdery, let the legends pick the lock on your heart. Raise your mug to the midnight mines. Every clue like a cursed D20. Every dragon horde hides a buried lie. Every jest masks a quiet plea. When nerdy quests collide with crimes untold, we follow every trail. Through the stories, through the shadows, till the last dark detail rolls. This is Nerdery and Murdery, where the tales grow